This week has been an interesting week, hasn't it? Yet again, Tom. And I think one of the really frustrating, perhaps, and fascinating things that have come out over the last few days is at a time when we're unlocking, so to speak, at the time when the conditions that have been controlling our behaviour due to COVID for best part of a year and a half are being relaxed. It's also the same time now that you have people who are platforming themselves and being platformed by others to introduce us to ideas that say they don't have an awful lot of scientific credibility. And I know that the argument is that the pharmaceutical companies have pretty much wrapped everything up and therefore getting access to contrary data. But, you know, the subject is obviously anti-vaxxers to start off the show. And over the weekend, we had the video sent to us of one of the primary anti-vaxxers, Piers Morgan, who's Jeremy Corbyn's brother.
Piers Corbyn.
Yeah, Piers Corbyn, yeah. Who is one of those ones who goes around the country, but goes on big platforms, goes on the stages, Trafalgar Square and all the demonstrations, and come together and say, you know, we're not taking the vaccine, and the reasons we're not taking the vaccine are plentyfold. It shouldn't be imposed on us by the state. We shouldn't have our limitations, shouldn't have limitations and opportunities for work denied us because we're not prepared to take the vaccine. Other people in other parts of society shouldn't have to take the vaccine. Some people saying that some sort of electrodes are being pumped into us so that we can be constantly tracked. Others are saying a whole range of other things. And I guess the problem is that when you fundamentally ask them for evidence or proof, if they don't point you to some person who's just sat in front of a screen on YouTube claiming to be a doctor without any authenticity, that's pretty much as far as it gets. It's very much a sort of soapbox preach. Now, what this video did, it showed Piers Corbyn being offered the opportunity for £10,000 if he would, let's say, turn the volume down on his criticisms of AstraZeneca. Now, the people who were stitching him up, setting him up, weren't from AstraZeneca. They were just playing that particular scenario out. But the thing is that we then see him take the money. And even though the money's been switched and the actual envelope that he actually takes is just monopoly money, he doesn't know that, of course. He's taken the money. And you also see him writing down on a piece of paper some of the positives of AstraZeneca, or some of the things about AstraZeneca that he'll now say, which he then releases a video later on, 2 or 3 days later, which denies this. And he said that the video was edited, it was constructed to create particular perspective. Now, of course, it was edited, but what's left in is extremely damaging. And of course, now what he's trying to do is rail it back. And I'm guessing, having already interacted with those people who are anti-vaxxers, they've dismissed it as a setup job, stitch-up job, and they don't see any issue and any problem at all in terms of the way that Piers Corbyn was treated. But I think there's a much more general, overarching discussion we need to have here about anti-vaxxers, isn't there, Tom?
There is. I mean, yeah. I mean, the video is pretty shocking and damning, because yeah, as you say, he essentially, as far as he knows, he was taking 10 grand in a brown envelope in return for agreeing that he won't be so critical of AstraZeneca in comparison with the other vaccines, which is, you know, seemingly rather corrupt. But I mean, you know, he's a kook, you know, as are the other anti-vaxxers. You know, he's at these demos, and there's David Icke, there's him, you know, David Icke that believes that, you know, we're being run by lizard aliens. You know, there's him, Piers Corbyn, you know, spouting all sorts of nonsense. There's the nurse, the ex-nurse who struck off as a nurse, you know, spouting all sorts of nonsense. And what they're saying is it's just a regurgitation of the worldwide, you know, anti-vax conspiracies, which we'll talk about how they came about. So yeah. I mean, I think what we wanted to do above all in this segment was really expose, from my point of view anyway, is to expose the anti-vaxxers, expose how the anti-vax movement came about, how it's developed, who's behind it, who profits from it. So, I mean, with that in mind, just so the viewers know, that the CCDH, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, have identified 4 different actors, if you like, not on the stage actors, 4 different types of people who are involved with the anti-vax movement in terms of creating and spreading content. For content, you can just read lies and propaganda. So the 4 types of people involved in anti-vax stuff online. Firstly, what's called economically motivated actors. So people with something to sell. So there's a whole massive sideline of people selling homeopathic remedies. Don't get a vaccine, buy these pills and you'll be, you know, buy these pills for $39.99 a bottle, and you'll be fully protected from COVID. These pills, these creams, or just follow me on YouTube. It costs $4.99 a month. You know, donate to me on Patreon or you know, whatever channel they're using, make donations. We've given you some knowledge for free, but if you want the full anti-vax knowledge, then you've got to pay $19.99 a month for us to let you in. So these are the people, these are the majority of people that are involved online in spreading anti-vaccine stuff. It's for economic reasons, as in they're grifters. They're grifters. They're making a ton of money by lying and very dangerous lies, obviously, murderous lies, arguably, killing lots of people, to make profit, to sell rubbish remedies or whatever. So that's the first and biggest group. Second group, they identified what's called hate actors, mostly racists, who spread certain types of anti-vax messages in order to spread their racism, their far-right hatred of Muslims, of Jews, of people from other countries, anti-China stuff, etc. The third type identified are what's called politically motivated actors, and this is either so people who want to undermine governments or just generally undermine science for political reasons. We're aware that obviously science has been undermined for all sorts of political reasons over the last, well, several decades, but particularly so recently in relation to climate change, in relation to, for example, you know, Brexit. There's a advantage to be gained by politicians from poo-pooing experts and saying to the public, don't listen to the experts, listen to us. We know more about climate change. We know more about Brexit. We know more about the economy than the economists. You know, politicians, their only interest is getting into power to gain power and wealth. That's their only interest. They have no interest in the truth, or in science. And but so they go out of their way to you know, to undermine science and scientific experts of all sorts. And that's included opposition leaders. It's very clear, you know, obviously in America with the Republicans, but I recently discovered in Slovakia, in the European Union, the main opposition leader is now sort of coming out as an anti-vax person. It seems primarily opposition politicians that are saying to people not to get the vaccine and being anti-vax. Personally, the only reason I can surmise for that, Jason, is that they, if there's mass death and chaos in that country, then that doesn't look good on the government, and they can criticize the government more, and then they hope to get elected or re-elected back into power if it's seen that the government of the time are doing badly in their response to coronavirus. It's the only reason why they're deliberately encouraging people not to take the vaccine. And then the fourth category is what they call misinformed citizens. So that's just gullible people that see stuff on YouTube, that see stuff on Facebook and believe it, and also are involved in spreading it, contribute to the spreading of it. So those are the four different types I identified, and in a sec I'll talk a bit about how the anti-vax movement sort of originated and developed. But interesting who the main sort of actors are.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. And having them sort of systemically broken down into categories enables us not only to see them discreetly, but also be able to see them how, in some cases, many of them overlap, whether for, you know, pecuniary gain or for the access to power, as you said, or whatever. It was interesting. There was an article in the Guardian yesterday that talked about a 42-year-old extremely fit mountain climber, and he had decided, because he was so fit, he decided, I'm not going to take the vaccine. It then goes on to talk about, from his family's perspective, how when he got COVID, if he got COVID, he expected just to have a cough, feel slightly unwell and get over it. What actually transpired was that he became seriously ill, went into ICU. His family then, as I said, started to detail the fact that he was begging the doctors to give him the vaccine, and of course it was too late, and he died in ICU of something that he only suspected that he would have very, very mild symptoms from. And his family are completely astonished, because they said, you know, he was one of the fittest people they'd ever known. So I think, you know, this isn't obviously an example that society should be looking at and thinking this is the norm, but it is an experience that families are having. And the fact that he got to that position where they said, you know, that he was so anti it. He wasn't anti it in any other reason, but he just genuinely thought he was too fit and healthy, and he was against, you know, injecting his body with stuff to get it. And as it turned out, he almost his last words in ICU were begging the doctors, who were powerless, because it had gone past that point. And it's tragic. It's extremely tragic. And I think that, you know, you have people walking around who create these ideas and these myths and these ideologies in their heads. And as you talked about there, from those people who are seeking to gain materially from spreading the lies, or seeking to gain positions of power and authority from these lies, but they very rarely, or they hardly ever at all, are able to actually justify scientifically. And I think what you talked about there, Tom, was bang on, in terms of what you have to do is you have to undermine the credibility of science. You have to create this impression that opinions are more worthwhile than facts. And once you've created that dangerous concoction, it means that the last category which you identified, the gullible person on social media, they become the ones who are most vulnerable to tragic outcomes, because most of the population in this country have just gone along and taken the vaccine, rightly or wrongly. They've gone along and taken the vaccine.
Yeah, rightly.
And we say it again.
Rightly.
I mean, we don't know the long-term consequences of the vaccine, do we? We simply don't. It hasn't been certificated by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence yet. It's not due to be for at least another 2 years. We don't know the long-term effects of anything that we put in our body, because our different biochemicals react in different ways over periods of time. So some of us, it might trigger cancers. Other of us, it might trigger a longer life expectancy. We just don't know. There's no point getting into that discussion. But what we do know from the current statistics is the number of fatalities and the number of people who are suffering the serious symptoms of COVID since we introduced the vaccine have declined quite significantly.
Yeah.
So in terms of the short stroke to medium, but certainly in terms of the short-term advantages of taking the vaccine, empirically and across statistical analysis, at the moment, it's a positive thing, a very positive thing. So for those people who aren't taking it and are therefore end up, having very serious symptoms, long COVID, or even dying, the short term has proved, as I said, to be extremely tragic, not only for them, but for their families.
Yeah.
But it's not coming, can I just say, finish off? Sorry, it's not coming from science. It's not like science is saying, well, there's all this evidence here to say that the vaccine's brilliant, but over here we have all this evidence that suggests actually the vaccine or certain vaccines can be lethal. What we're having is a group of people who are effectively standing up, and subjectively they're giving their opinions that have become authoritative and are therefore influencing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide into a decision that could prove fatal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I want to check out some statistics for our viewers. If we've got any viewers here that vaccine hesitant, that are not sure about getting the vaccine, it's obviously your choice, but I just want to check out some latest statistics from the UK and the US. So in the UK, here are the current facts. Pre-vaccine, if you got infected with COVID, you had a 1 in 10 chance of ending up in hospital with, moderate to severe symptoms if you were hospitalized. 1 in 10 chance. After the vaccine, that's a 1 in 45 chance. So 4.5 times less likely to go to hospital if you've had the vaccine. And pre-vaccine, if you got infected, you had a 1 in 60 chance of death. With the vaccine, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of death. So it's about more than 16 times less likely to die if you have the vaccine. Those are the facts in the UK, the most recent facts. In the US at the moment, it's being described now as a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The vast majority of people in hospital and dying are the ones that have not had a vaccine. Hospitalized in the last sort of month or so, recent figures in the US, 97% of people in hospital with COVID are unvaccinated. 99.5% of people dying of COVID in America recently are unvaccinated. 0.5% are vaccinated. Because of course the vaccine's not 100%, doesn't have 100% efficacy, doesn't work for everyone 100% of the time. So it is possible to be vaccinated and die, but we're talking about tiny numbers compared to the unvaccinated. I mean, 0.5%. So it seems in America at the moment, you're 200 times more likely to die if you're unvaccinated. That's what the 99.5% and the 0.5% means. You're 200 times more likely to die if you're unvaccinated. So those are the current statistics in the recent statistics in the UK and the US. Pretty stark. I just wanted to move on just quickly before we sort of finish this topic, just give viewers a little bit of insight into the, if viewers didn't know, into the anti-vax movement and how it's sort of grown and developed over the last 22 years or so. There was a small anti-vax movement, that existed prior to the late 1990s, but it really sort of took off from 1998 onwards, when and there was a very good Channel 4 documentary about this recently, and it's also been well documented in a host of articles, if people want to look them up. And we're going to put something on Dorset Eye, an article that includes information about this. But there was a UK doctor called Andrew Wakefield, who's generally regarded as the godfather of the modern anti-vax movement, and he published, along with some other people, but he led this study, which was published in the Lancet. Later, it's since been retracted and disproven. But anyway, he published an article that suggested a link between the MMR combined measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, a link to that and autism, and also potentially colon problems. And he had a press conference. He's since gone on 60 Minutes in America and declared that this study proves that there's a link. And of course, that created a furore in the UK and across the world even. And
I remember it well.
Yeah, and a lot of people were very concerned about whether or not they should vaccinate their kids with the combined MMR vaccine. And that has led in the UK, in the US, and other parts of the world, it's led to the return of measles as a deadly disease for children, which was essentially eradicated. And in some parts of the world, it's been back and killing kids again, measles, because people have not been vaccinating their kids. So it's over time, Andrew Wakefield was exposed as a con man, as a liar and a con man. He was being paid by a lawyer who wanted to sue the makers of the MMR vaccine. So he was paid to undertake this study. The lawyer identified the 12 children, there were just 12 children involved in the study. They were declared as all having autism, though it was later determined that they didn't. They didn't all have autism. And he was paid over 430 something, I think it was, £1,000 by this lawyer to carry out this study. He used unethical procedures, he did all sorts of unethical things. But the other things that Andrew Wakefield did at the time that he released this study was that he had developed a patent for the single measles vaccine. So obviously telling people not to take the combined MMR vaccine, and that there was a link between that and autism, telling people that would encourage more and more people to have the three single vaccines for measles, mumps and rubella separately. He had taken out a patent on a single measles vaccine that he stood to make a fortune with if people switched to the single vaccines. He also had planned to develop things like diagnostic testing kits, which, according to Channel 4 journalist, that he had said to him that he would make something like $43 million per year from these diagnostic testing kits that he developed under a sort of medical company under his wife's name. So he was struck off. Anyway, there was a 217-day investigation by the Medical Council in the UK, the GMC, and he was struck off. It was determined that his study was fraudulent. It was motivated by economic gain, and 21 studies since then have disproven that there's any link between the MMR jab and autism. So it was just utter BS, utter lies. Having been struck off in the UK from being a doctor, he moved to America, where his anti-vaccine grift has been incredibly profitable. And yeah, he's gone around the UK, gone on TV shows. He gets paid a lot of money to go to conferences, and he's made a film called Vaxxed, very popular in the anti-vax community. It grossed over $1 million in its first year. And him and his ex-wife have property worth over $2 million. He's got over $1 million home in a millionaire's area of Miami. And he's now split up with his ex-wife, and he's dating Elle the Body McPherson, which is rather bizarre. But and of course she's was divorced from a billionaire, and her divorce was worth $45 million, and they live in a $6.7 million home together. So he's done very, very well from spreading lies that have killed people, and those lies are absolutely proven to be lies. And there's a bit of background about him, and he's still doing it. And of course, since COVID arrived, he and a load of people like him, or sort of underneath him, or that have tagged on to what he's done and replicated it, have made an awful lot of money. from spreading lies that kill people. Isn't that appalling?
Yeah, it is absolutely appalling. And I think that's where we need to end, because we started off by identifying some of the motivations of anti-vaxxers, and to finish off with a specific example of something that happened 20-25 years ago and is renowned, certainly in this country, and as we see in America and probably in other parts of the world, where people would sit around the table, newborn babies became the victims of parents who themselves were the victims of bad science, if we want to call it something, and got into heated arguments and got into hostility and conflict with friends and family members as well. It wasn't just a biological or epidemiological response. It became a social response, because just like now, people came into conflict. And it was on one side you had good science, and on the other hand, you either have bad science or you have no science at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most distressing parts. As I said before, it's not science versus science here. It's opinion and it's facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And can I just also add, you're dead right, it is opinion versus facts, science versus anti-science. And can I just encourage people, the anti-vaxxers classically, a bit like the QAnon people, have this thing, do your own research. What they mean by that is follow us on YouTube, watch our YouTube videos, and follow us on Facebook, and you know, share our Facebook nonsense, and read all the stuff that we're pumping out to you, which is nonsense. That's what they mean. You know, consume more of our rubbish content. Can I just say to viewers, you know, if you want to do your own research, read the Lancet, read the British Medical Journal. Those are the two renowned across the world, leading, you know, UK-based, British-based medical journals, British Medical Journal and the Lancet. And if you want to know the truth about anything to do with COVID, including vaccines, read things on the Lancet, read things on the British Medical Journal.
And I think just really to finish off this, and it's about accountability. You've already identified a doctor that was struck off having been investigated. So although it transpires that he didn't lose everything because he just simply moved to America and made a lot more money, the issue here is that if you go to some botch up video on YouTube, what's the worst that can happen to that person? Who just simply close his account and become anonymous again? What's the worst that can happen to a doctor that purposefully speaks lies? They can be struck off and they can never be doctors again. And for most of them,
do you think it's possible someone will get sued, Jace? I mean, I'd quite like to see the family of someone that followed one of these people like Wakefield online and chose not to get the vaccine and died from COVID. I'd quite like them to sue people like Wakefield or the other sort of YouTubers.
Yeah, but the problem is that the courts and the lawyers will then have asked for proof that there's a direct link between what they said and what those particular individuals ended up doing in terms of their decision making. And
you have to prove that.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That was fascinating, Tom. Right, next we're moving on to the